You've probably already heard of the GT Neo. You've probably already seen a number of great videos on YouTube about the GT Neo. And you might be watching this video still deciding whether it's right for you. I'm going to save you a little bit of time, and here's my conclusion. There's only one thing that I don't love about this wheel, and that's the way that the LEDs combine when showing certain colors. That's it. I wanted to get that out of the way because there is so much that I like about this wheel that I worried that it would just come across as like a promotional video. But the truth is Simagic has done a really great job, and I actually asked to buy this review unit from Racecraft and simracing.com, who loaned it to me. Unfortunately, this review unit is slated for other purposes after the review, so I'll be very sad to see it go. But stick around and see what I like so much about the Simagic GT Neo. The GT Neo sells for 549 Australian dollars, which is incredible value for what you get. Racecraft and simracing.com are my local distributors, and a big thank you to them for organising a review sample as soon as local retail stock arrived. If you're in Australia, certainly get in touch with them and see how they can help you, because they have been really wonderful to me, and I think they will be to you as well. So my GT Neo arrived with a fairly substantial dent in the box, but like all of the Simagic products that I've unboxed, it was packaged really well and there was no issues with that at all. Now, I'm actually not going to be doing a full rundown of all the features of the GT Neo. I think that a lot of the other videos have already accomplished that. But I will be talking about my experience with the wheel overall, and one of the first things is the construction. So it's really, really sturdy. I've mentioned on the channel before that I do prefer the closed bottom rim designs because they do offer a bit more stiffness, and there's just no twisting or creaking in the body. All of the gaps are really tight. And so this is really living up to what I've come to expect from Simagic, which is really good construction. On the topic of its construction, the GT Neo's body is made of an injection molded carbon fiber reinforced plastic. And when I first held it in my hands, I thought it was a true formed carbon composite shell. But it turns out that when you compare this against all the photos that you can see online, if you study the pattern of the carbon flakes, they're actually all identical. And so I think what's happening is that Simagic have incorporated the forged carbon finish into the walls of their injection molds, kind of like this 3D printer sheet, which has the carbon fiber weave, and that embeds the carbon fiber pattern into your prints. When I'm racing with the GT Neo, I never feel like it's lacking any stiffness or strength. But when I use it back to back with the Simagic FX, I do feel that the FX has that extra step of solidity with its CNC aluminium body and genuine carbon fiber front plate. That being said, I do find that the GT Neo is a lot more interesting to look at because the face of the wheel actually has design details and geometry versus the rather plain look of the flat carbon fiber plate. And I will also say that I much prefer having a dedicated rev LED rather than the Simagic logo that lights up in lieu of a proper rev strip on the FX. I think this is a sign of Simagic's design team maturing. So this being their latest steering wheel design, they've really upped the ante in terms of ergonomics, which we'll touch on later, but also style and appearance. And another thing that they've reworked is the quick release. So if we have a look inside, we'll see that there are some additional pins which Simagic haven't come out and said exactly what they're for, but no doubt we'll be seeing a revision on their wheelbases soon to take advantage of whatever functionality that has. But also the quick release collar has been enlarged, and there's also a little lip on the edge that just makes it a little bit easier to grab. And I think on a wheel like the GT Neo, it's not really that necessary because the body of the wheel is quite narrow and it's very easy to get access around that body. And we see this with the Simagic FX, which has the older style collar, and actually I'll put the two side by side so you can see that. So it's a much smaller collar, but because the body is so narrow, again, you have a lot of access, very easy to activate that. I think the wheels that need the revised quick release collar the most are the bigger ones. So we have the Simagic GTS, and we also have the GTC. And so these have bigger button plates, but they've also got a third spoke at the bottom, which gets in the way of how you would actually grab onto that quick release. So we can see with such a big wheel, it's quite tricky to get your fingers right around there. So I'm curious to see if Simagic will be revising the older rims with the larger quick release collar. There are definitely some cost-cutting measures that Simagic have implemented to try to keep the costs down on the GT Neo. We've already talked about the injection molded body. There's also some material substitutions, like the hats on these rotary encoders are plastic, and also these shift paddles are aluminium instead of carbon fiber. I actually prefer aluminium for the paddles. I don't see a point in making those carbon fiber. And I race in gloves, so I wouldn't even know that these are plastic rather than metal. And another cost-cutting measure that I've already touched on in the introduction is the LEDs. So the way that they've done the LEDs is each of the buttons has a small cluster of LEDs right in the center. And when the LEDs activate, you can see each individual one. And it's not such a big issue when you're displaying any of the primary colors, so the red, the green, the blue. But when you have combinations of 2 or more, what you'll see is the individual LEDs sort of glowing through the overall color. So let's say we have purple, you'll see an overall purple color, but the red and the blue LEDs show. And white shows this the most because you're expecting a clean white light, but you actually end up with 3 little colors. Overall, it kind of looks like a green and purple tinge to all of the LEDs on the face. If we compare that to the FX, it has a much softer glow. Even with the combined LED colors, it's a much more pleasing quality of light. And it's something that's very hard to capture on camera. But it's definitely something I noticed, especially because I don't use button stickers. I never got into that. And also part of it was I wanted to return these wheels in as new condition back to Simagic. And that's all on me. They never made any condition on me to do that. Maybe I should get over it and actually try those button stickers and see how they go. Also with the buttons, you'll notice that they are white all the way through. If we compare that to the FX, they actually are sort of like a shadow tinted color, and they've also got a black collar all the way around there as well. Overall, I do prefer the look of the FX buttons as well as the glow of the LEDs underneath them. But again, we're really getting really fussy here. This is only going to be an issue when you're actually studying the look of the wheel. When you're actually racing and you're just seeing the color of the LEDs in the peripheral vision, it's not really that big of an issue, except in the rev bar. I originally had the rev bar to flash white on redline, but the green-purple tinge that the rev bar took on when it was doing the white was a bit distracting to me, so I actually changed it to straight purple. Using the GT Neo was super easy. I happened to plug it in by USB the first time I hooked it up to the computer, and it did a software update via SimPro in about 10 seconds. I'm not sure if it can do a software update via the quick release when it's mounted onto the wheelbase. I didn't have a chance to do that because it already updated by the time that I actually connected it to the wheelbase. In terms of the ergonomics, I think it is 10 out of 10. The 300mm width is really nice. All of the buttons actually fall within the range of my thumbs, which the FX wheel does not. So I tried to get comfortable with the FX, but it's just never clicked with me. Whereas with the GT Neo, the buttons are exactly where I expect them to be, and I was very, very pleased about that. Also, the handles are just the right amount of chunkiness. They fall really nicely in my hands, and I don't have very big hands. And actually, when I go back to the FX wheel, I feel like there's a big hollow underneath my fingers where the FX rim is just a little bit narrow. I would really like to see these grips on the FX, actually. The shifter paddles from the factory I felt were a little bit too far in, but they do have these slotted mounting points, so it was really straightforward to just loosen the bolts, slide the paddles outwards and tighten them back up. And I really like where they are now, at the very outwards part of their adjustability. The shift resistance is actually quite light. It may be one of the lightest magnetic shifter pulls I have in the studio. And I would like to actually just put an extra magnet on the back here to give it a little bit more snap. And you can see that I don't have the right size magnets, but I've just put these little ones on for the time being. And it does give the shifter just a little bit more resistance, which I think feels really nice. And it's really secure when racing, so I think this is a really simple and cheap modification if you like a little bit more shift resistance. The startup lighting sequence I think is fixed. I didn't see any option to modify the way that the wheel starts up. It is a little bit flashy and loud, but there is a part of me that secretly likes that. But I would like to see an option to have more of like a soft startup or like a wave of color. The Simagic software gives pretty basic control over the RGB functionality of the wheel. I did find that connecting via SimHub, there was a bit of a learning curve to how to activate the various functionality of the GT Neo, but the control you have via SimHub is so much better. I would definitely recommend that you run the GT Neo via SimHub, which means that it needs to be connected via USB. And that actually brings me to another point, and that is that I'm surprised that Simagic didn't include MagLink as a standard feature on the rim. It has to be bought as a third-party accessory. And part of what surprised me is that when I took off the standard backplate for the GT Neo, it already has all the cutouts for 70 and 50mm PCD mounting. So I was able to just use the standard plate to mount onto my Fanatec podium hub, and I did reuse the USB-C connector, but it worked completely fine. So I was able to use the GT Neo on my Fanatec wheelbase without MagLink, just via USB-C. One thing to keep in mind is that when you start up the Fanatec DD1, it does a near 360-degree rotation, so I would definitely recommend to leave the cable unplugged when you turn on your Fanatec DD1, or actually, maybe all of the Fanatec wheelbases do that as well. But my startup sequence for the DD1 was to mount the wheel, switch on the power to the wheelbase, plug in the USB-C connector, and then turn the wheel 90 degrees to activate high torque mode. And the wheel is ready to drive. Driving the GT Neo on a Fanatec wheelbase is really interesting because it gives a couple of opportunities. One, we get to compare the GT Neo against what I think is the most reasonable Fanatec competitor, which is the Formula V2. And also, we can compare the wheelbases, the Simagic Alpha Mini and the Fanatec DD1, since we're using the exact same wheel on both. So I want to start with the wheel because we are reviewing the GT Neo after all. So using the 300mm GT Neo really highlights why Formula rims are so small. And I don't think it's anything about making them smaller for finer control or so on. It's because in a Formula position, the steering wheel is right over your belly. So when you turn the wheel 90 degrees, something bigger will actually hit your belly. So definitely interested to find that little comparison between the two. But in terms of construction, there's a huge difference between the GT Neo and the Formula V2. So with the Formula V2, you do notice a lot of creaking in the body, and my V2 also had a lot of flex in the right handle especially. And when I had a closer look, it actually turns out both of the handles on my Formula V2, which is 3 years old, have broken. So I guess in a way it's not very fair to compare the GT Neo against a broken Formula V2, but by the same token, I'm a bit disappointed that I paid nearly $3,000 for my DD1 with the steering wheel, and the steering wheel's broken. So take of that what you will. It's quite an old steering wheel design. Fanatec are really overdue to redo the Formula V2. But enough about that. Let's talk about the GT Neo. So, like I said before, consistent with its use on the Simagic bases, it's extremely solid. The RGB, it's currently on camera, controlled via SimPro. So the color scheme is under the control of the Simagic software. But I couldn't get the pit limiter function, the traction control, any of that to light up for whatever reason. Whoops. So I think definitely the way to go with the GT Neo is definitely run it via SimHub. There's just so much more control in terms of the functionality, but you also get different colors rather than the 6 or 7 that SimPro allows you to use. So, yes, having a cable connecting the wheel to the PC is a small inconvenience, but when you're driving it, it really is a non-factor. Now, one thing that I will say that I miss about the Formula V2, actually two things. It's the quality of the LEDs on the rev strips. So having a look at the GT Neo rev LEDs, they are really, they look quite bare. You can definitely see the individual LEDs behind the window here. Whereas on the Fanatec, you get this lovely window of just uniform color. So I think Fanatec got the LEDs right there. And the other thing is the tuning menu. I talk about this all the time, but being able to tune the force feedback settings through the wheel is a big convenience. With a Simagic wheel, at least I think everything except the FX Pro wheel, you have to Alt-Tab, make your adjustments in the software with your keyboard or mouse, and then get back to racing. Whereas with the Fanatec, you can sort of do it on the fly. Particularly if you're in the middle of an endurance stint, you're getting a bit tired, you just turn the force feedback down a little bit and away you go. You can even do that in the middle of a corner if you wanted to. That being said, on the balance of things, I really like the GT Neo better. Naturally, I'm going to compare against what I know, and that's the Formula V2, which I have owned for the last 3 years. And you can't buy this anymore. It's been superseded by the V2.5, which, as I understand it, is an evolution of this same design, which debuted about 6 years ago. As I understand it, the same issues that plague this one, the loose encoders and the general plastic construction, still affect the V2.5. But yes, it was basically the go-to affordable, fully featured Formula rim until today. I know this is a GT rim, it's a little bit bigger. But if we were to buy these products today, the Fanatec goes for $515 and the GT Neo for $549. So similar pricing, but then you have to factor in that the V2.5 doesn't come with dual clutch paddles as standard. You have to actually buy the advanced paddle module for $300, which brings the price of this in terms of feature parity to about $814. Which is quite a lot more than the $549 asking price of the GT Neo. And in terms of feature parity, we're really just talking about buttons and paddles. We haven't even started talking about the LED functionality. Now, if you wanted to run this wheel on Fanatec, you would need to put on the podium hub, which does add an extra $215 plus the MagLink plate, which adds $39. And that brings up the cost of this for a Fanatec system to $803, which is less than the $814 that Fanatec want you to pay for the V2.5 with the advanced paddle module. So I think this puts Fanatec in a difficult spot because the best, most affordable, full-featured rim for this kind of form factor is the Simagic GT Neo. So I think what Simagic have shown is that Fanatec have sort of rested on their laurels for a little bit, and I really cannot stress how the Simagic is, for less money, the far better product. You only do lose the ability to use the tuning menu and also console compatibility if that is something that's really important to you. But yes, I think that Simagic have really disrupted things a little bit here, and it's just a wake-up call for Fanatec to please give us a new, affordable, fully featured Formula rim. So how about the GT Neo on the DD1 versus the Simagic Alpha Mini? So, I've said this on Reddit and Facebook a number of times now. Both bases offer a lot of tunability, and once you dial them in, they feel exactly the same. I do use my DD1 at between 5 and 8 Newton meters. So, the Simagic Alpha Mini has 10, allegedly more Newton meters available. So really, the driving experience between the two is almost identical. What isn't identical is the quick release. So I've actually had to switch the DD1 back to its standard rubber QR1 collar because as it turns out, and this is quite common knowledge at this point, but the QR1s vary quite a bit between each other, and the 3D printed quick adapter that I had for the Formula V2 had a really sloppy fit against the QR1 on the podium hub. So I have had to go back to the standard QR1 rubber collar, and I'd forgotten what a pain it is because the steering wheels really sort of get stuck to that rubber and they're a real pain to pull off. But in terms of the stiffness of the QR1 definitely has just that little click on fast changes of direction, which I'd never really noticed in the past, but having spent more time with the Simagic wheelbases and quick releases, I'm really learning the differences between the two. And the Simagic quick release is superior, and it's actually, I would have said that the Fanatec was easier to use because the spring collar is generally a bit lighter than what you get on the Simagic QRs. But on the balance of it, Simagic does a better QR. And I'm not the first person to say that, but I am a believer now. A few months ago, I would have said, look, the QR1 works just fine. But I'm definitely seeing what's wrong with the QR1. And Fanatec sees that too. I mean, they've released the QR2, which supposedly addresses all those issues. But I don't really like the way that Fanatec is handling their QR2 inventory. The cost is definitely prohibitive. And for me personally, I'm not seeing enough from Fanatec with their pedal development, with their steering wheel development. I'm not seeing enough from Fanatec to spend any more of my money on Fanatec products. That's just the truth. That being said, if anyone from Fanatec is watching and has some insider info to share with me, or if they want to send me some QR2s so I can have a better experience with my DD1, of course I'll be happy to make some content and share my experience with all of you guys. So that brings me to my final thoughts on the Simagic GT Neo. And if you watched the whole review, then you'll probably see that I spent a bit more time complaining about the LEDs than you might have expected. And the truth is that that is probably the only weak part of the GT Neo's game. And even then, it's only when I'm studying it and not actually driving. When driving, I found the wheel to be a real pleasure to use on the Simagic or the Fanatec wheelbases. And I think that Simagic have done a really good job creating a wheel that is ergonomic, very, very functional, very tunable, and compatible. So very excited to actually use something of this quality on the Fanatec wheelbase. And especially since I discovered that my Fanatec wheel has broken, I don't think I am going to spend any more money on that. The Simagic GT Neo, which I will be buying from John at Racecraft, take this as an order, thank you, John. It is going to be a way for me to have a higher quality wheel on my existing wheelbase, and it's also going to give me an in should I wish to switch completely to Simagic or any other wheelbase as well. And I think that that is going to be Simagic's strength. They have a wheel that's compatible with every wheelbase out there, as long as you run USB via MagLink. And when you see and feel the quality in your hands, I think that you'll definitely think about buying into Simagic. So I know that I sound a bit like a Simagic shill, but I've just been really impressed with the attention to detail that they put out there. And there are some aspects of some of their products that I don't like, and when I get my reviews out there on YouTube, you'll definitely see some of the things that I don't like about the Simagic products. But the overall experience has been really good, and I'm really happy to say that the GT Neo can add itself to the list of Simagic products that I have an overwhelmingly positive experience with. Once again, big thank you to Racecraft and simracing.com for making this happen. They are some really nice guys there, and if you're in Australia, definitely speak to them because they'll take really good care of you with the service side, and the Simagic products, of course, will stand up on their own from the product quality perspective. Anyways, that's it from me. Lots more content coming, so be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.